I've spent 40 years on other men's land, watching other men's lives the way you watch weather move across a valley, knowing it'll reach you eventually, knowing there's nothing you can do but stand there and take it. I've seen droughts kill cattle and kill marriages in the same season. I've seen grown men cry into a horse's mane because it was the only thing on the place that wouldn't flinch. But I never saw a man dig himself a grave while still breathing the way Cole Brennan did that winter. He didn't drink. He didn't run. He just went quiet and stayed quiet and let the quiet harden over him like ice over a stock tank. You could see the woman underneath it, his wife, pounding on the surface with both fists, and he never once looked down. It took 6 words to break it. 6 words from a boy who barely came up to my belt buckle. I was standing close enough to hear them, and I'll carry them till I'm in the dirt myself. This is how it happened, or how I saw it happen anyway, which is the only honest thing a man can ever claim. The calf came backwards, and that was the start of everything that mattered. I had my arm in past the elbow, the heifer screaming the way they do, and Cole was on his knees in the muck beside me with the lantern. And for the first time in I don't know how long he was looking at something. Looking at it like it counted. The rain was coming down sideways off the Chiricahuas, that February rain that's half ice, and the birthing shed roof was leaking in 3 places, and none of it mattered because we had a calf trying to come into the world tail first, and a mother who was too tired to help. "Walt," he said, "you got the hooves." "Got one." I was feeling around in the heat and the dark of that animal, blind as a mole, and my fingers found the second hock and I got the chain loop over it. Got 'em both now. Then pull when she pushes, not before. I want you to understand something about Cole Brennan before I tell you the rest. The man who said pull when she pushes in that calm, flat voice, that was the real one. That was the one I'd worked beside for 9 years. Steady, smart with stock. The kind of rancher who could read a cow's eye and tell you 3 days ahead she was going to drop. The kind who'd be out at 3 in the morning in weather like this without a word of complaint because the animal needed him, and that was that. That man had been gone since October. I'd been working for a ghost wearing his coat, and the only time the ghost ever flickered back into Cole was when something was dying and needed his hands. Funny thing, I thought about that a lot after. The heifer bore down, and I pulled, and Cole pulled, and there was a long, terrible second where nothing gave, and I thought we'd lose them both. Then the calf came in a rush of steam and fluid, and we both went over backwards into the straw, and the little thing lay there in the lantern light not breathing. Cole moved fast, cleared the nose, the mouth, swung the calf by its back legs to drain the lungs, rubbed it down rough with a feed sack, rougher than you'd think you should, but rough is what wakes them. "Come on," he said low, almost to himself. "Come on, come on, come on." And the calf coughed, shuddered, and pulled in its first breath of cold mountain air and let out a wet little bawl. I laughed. I couldn't help it. There's nothing like it, that sound, no matter how many you've heard. 40 years and it still gets me. Cole didn't laugh. He sat back on his heels and looked at the calf breathing, and something crossed his face that I can only call grief, though I didn't understand it then. He wiped his hands on his jeans. He stood up, and the steady man was gone again just like that, and the ghost said, "Get her settled. I'm going up to the house." He didn't go to the house. I watched him from the shed door. He walked out past the corrals in the freezing rain, and he went into the barn, the old barn where he'd been sleeping since October on a cot he'd dragged in there himself, like a hired hand, like a stranger on his own place. And the lights of the house, the real house, his house, glowed yellow and warm 100 yards off with his wife inside it, and his boy, and he turned his back on all of it and shut the barn door behind him. I stood there a while with the rain dripping off my hat brim. Then I went and did my job, because that's what I'm paid for, and it's the only thing I've ever been any good at. I keep a log, have my whole life. Little water-stained notebooks, 1 a year going back to before some of you were born. Calving dates, whether which fences need pulling, how much hay's left in the loft. My wife, she's been gone 11 years now, used to say I'd write down my own funeral if somebody handed me the date. She wasn't wrong. So I know exactly when it started, because I wrote it down without knowing what I was writing. October 9, Lacey gone, God help them. Lacey was their daughter, she was 9. You want me to tell it straight, so I'll tell it straight, though it's not a thing I like to put into words. There's a stretch of the creek down past the lower pasture where the bank's been undercut for years. Everybody knew it. Lacey knew it. She'd been told 100 times. But she was 9, and it was a hot afternoon at the tail end of September, and the dog went in after a stick, and she went in after the dog. Marion found her. That's the part nobody ever says out loud, but everybody knows. The mother found her own girl in the water at the bend where the cottonwood leans, and she carried her up the bank and did everything you're supposed to do, everything they teach you, for 40 minutes until the ambulance came up the long dirt road from town. 40 minutes. And it wasn't enough, because it's almost never enough, but God love her, she tried until her arms gave out. Cole was in Tucson that day, buying a bull. He got the call standing in another man's pasture with a checkbook in his hand. I think that's where it lived in him, the thing that broke. Not that Lacey died, that he wasn't there, that his wife had held their drowned daughter and screamed into a phone while he was 120 miles away dickering over the price of an animal. He never said so. He never said much of anything. But a man's silence has a shape to it if you watch long enough. And the shape of Cole's silence was a man who couldn't forgive himself and had decided, somewhere down where decisions like that get made, that he didn't deserve to be forgiven by anybody else either. So he stopped letting them. He stopped sitting at the table, took his meals standing at the counter or out in the barn or not at all. He stopped sleeping in the house. He worked, Lord, how he worked, 16-hour days fixing fence that didn't need fixing, riding line in weather that kill a sensible man like he was trying to outrun something on foot. And Marion. I should tell you about Marion. She was a schoolteacher when Cole married her, came out from back east, the kind of woman the old hands figured wouldn't last a winter and who turned out tougher than any of us. She could throw a calf and grade a stack of papers in the same evening. After Lacey, she didn't fall apart the way you'd expect, and I think that almost made it worse for Cole, because he wanted somebody to fall apart with and she wouldn't give him the permission of her own collapse. She grieved standing up. She kept the boy fed and clean and going to school. She planted the spring garden in March like she always did, on her knees in the dirt, and I watched her from the equipment shed planting rows for a family that had a hole blown through the middle of it, and I had to go inside and sit down a minute. She tried with Cole. God knows she tried. I'd see her cross the yard to the barn in the evening with 2 plates of supper, and 20 minutes later she'd cross back with both plates, and the set of her shoulders going away from that barn is a thing I'd pay money to forget. She talked to him. I caught pieces of it sometimes, not meaning to. Cole, please, I can't do this alone. You're not alone, you've got Eli. I've got a husband sleeping in a barn, is what I've got. And nothing, always nothing. He'd just pick up a halter or a wrench and turn it over in his hands like it held the answer, and she'd stand there and then she'd go, because what else is there to do? Months of it, October into November into the dead heart of winter. And the strangest, saddest part, the part I couldn't make sense of, was the boy. Eli was 6. He had his mother's dark eyes and his father's stubborn jaw, and he had not, as near as I could tell, fully understood that his sister wasn't coming back. Or maybe he understood it the way 6-year-olds understand things, sideways, in fits, the truth arriving in pieces over years instead of all at once like it does for us. He'd ask about her sometimes. When's Lacey coming home? And you'd watch the adults in the room die a little and try to find words. But here's the thing about Eli. He worshipped his father, followed him everywhere those first weeks before he learned not to, trotted out to the barn with his little boots on the wrong feet, and Cole would. This is the part that took me a while to forgive, and I'm not sure I have yet. Cole couldn't look at the boy either. I think because Eli was alive and Lacey wasn't, and a grieving man's mind does cruel arithmetic in the dark. He never raised his voice to Eli, never laid a hand on him, nothing like that. He just Wasn't there. The boy would come out to the barn and Cole would send him back to the house. Go on now, I'm working, day after day. And I watched a 6-year-old learn, slow and terrible, that his father had no room for him, and learn to stop coming. And that was the worst thing I saw that whole winter. Worse even than the calf that didn't make it in December. Worse than Marion crossing back from the barn with 2 cold plates. A boy stops walking toward his father. There's no fence pull, no vet bill, no drought that's harder to watch than that. I almost quit. I'll be honest about it. Around the middle of January, I had my truck half packed. A man my age doesn't have to stand in the middle of another family's slow drowning if he doesn't want to. I'd worked plenty of places. There's always somebody needs an experienced hand. What stopped me was Marion, standing on the porch one frozen morning with a coffee cup going cold in her hands, looking out at the barn the way I'd looked out at the house that night of the calf. She said not really to me. He used to sing, you know, when he worked. Hymns mostly, even though he wasn't a church man. Drove me crazy. I'd give anything to hear it now. I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. She turned and looked at me then, and her face was doing that thing where a person decides whether to trust you with something. Walt, am I a fool for staying? And I want you to know that I thought about it before I answered, because she deserved a real answer and not a comfortable one. No, I said finally, but you can't stay forever waiting on a man who's decided he's already dead. That's not staying. That's getting buried with him. She nodded slow, drank her cold coffee. I gave myself till spring, she said. I told myself if he's not back by the time the apricots bloom. She didn't finish it. She didn't have to. The apricot tree by the kitchen door was Lacey's tree, planted the year she was born, and it bloomed the first week of April most years, white and pink and shameless, the prettiest thing on the whole hardscrabble place. She'd given her husband until their dead daughter's tree bloomed to come back to the living. And after that, she was taking the boy and going. I unpacked my truck. I don't fully know why. Some part of me wanted to see how it came out, and some part couldn't stand to leave that boy and that woman alone with the ghost, and some part, the part I don't talk about, remembered my own wife's last spring, and the things I didn't say to her in time, and figured maybe I'd been put on that ranch for a reason an old cowboy wasn't meant to understand. The apricot buds came on fat and pink in the last days of March. And Cole Brennan, blind to all of it, fixed fence. It was the 1st of April when the boy went missing, and I've never been able to decide if God has a sense of humor or just a sense of timing. We didn't know he was gone at first. That's how these things happen, not with a scream but with an absence that takes a while to notice. Marion had driven into town for feed and the mail. I was up in the north pasture moving cows. Cole was somewhere along the west fence line with a post-hole digger and his private misery. And Eli, 6 years old, home from school with a spring cold and supposed to be napping on the couch, had woken up with a 6-year-old's logic and a question he decided needed answering. I pieced it together later. He'd asked his mother that morning before she left, "When's Lacey coming home?" and his mother, worn down past the place where you have careful words, had said, tired, "She's not, baby. She's gone to heaven. She's not coming home." And Eli had thought about that the way he thought about everything, sideways, and had decided that if Lacey wasn't coming home, somebody ought to go get her. And the last place anybody had seen Lacey, in his understanding of the world, was the creek. So he put his boots on, wrong feet, I'd bet money, and he walked out the kitchen door, past the apricot tree heavy with buds, and he went down the long slope toward the lower pasture to bring his sister back. It was Marion who raised the alarm, home from town, the couch empty, the door open, calling his name into a silence that gave nothing back. I heard her from the north pasture, not the words, just the pitch of it. That particular note, a mother's voice hits that travels across open country like a shot, and puts the fear of God into any creature with ears. I left the cows where they stood and rode. And Cole came off that west fence line at a dead run, post-hole digger dropped in the dirt, hat gone, running flat out across his own land toward the sound of his wife's terror. And I swear to you I had not seen the man run in 6 months, had not seen him move with any urgency that wasn't about a dying animal. And there, he was eating up ground like his life depended on it. Because it did, he just didn't know it yet. We found Marion in the yard, white as the apricot buds, and she got out 3 words. "He's gone, the creek." And Cole made a sound I won't try to describe and was gone again, down the slope, toward the water, toward the bend with the leaning cottonwood where his daughter had died, screaming his son's name into the cold spring air. I rode after him. Marion ran behind us both, and that quarter-mile down to the creek was the longest stretch of ground I have ever crossed, because all 3 of us were running toward the exact same nightmare we'd already lived once, and the only question the world had left open was whether it intended to make us live it twice. The boy was at the water's edge, alive, standing on the undercut bank, the same bank, God help us, peering down into the brown rushing snowmelt with his little face screwed up in concentration, like a man who's lost his keys. Cole hit that bank at a speed that should have taken them both into the water, but he didn't grab the boy and run. That's not what he did. He dropped to his knees in the mud a foot from the edge, and he wrapped both arms around his son, and he pulled him back from the lip of the bank, and he held him so tight the boy squawked, and Cole was shaking all over and saying, "No, no, no, not you too," into Eli's hair, and it was the most words I'd heard the man string together since autumn. And Eli, 6 years old, indignant, wriggling, with no earthly idea what he'd done, pushed back against his father's chest and looked up at him with those dark, serious eyes, and he said the 6 words. He said, "Daddy, why are you so sad?" That was it, that was all of it. "Daddy, why are you so sad?" Not I was looking for Lacey, not I'm sorry, just a small boy who had spent half a year watching his father turn to stone, finally getting close enough to ask the only question that had ever mattered. Asking it plain, the way only a child can, with no idea it was a key, with no idea it would fit the one lock in the world that needed opening. I have thought about why those words did what bigger words couldn't. Marion had begged. I'd as good as told him he was burying himself alive. 6 months of grief and pleading and cold suppers carried back across the yard. None of it touched him. But a child doesn't ask you to come back. A child doesn't accuse you or grieve at you or hold up a mirror to your failures. A child just sees you, sees straight through the stone to the hurt underneath, and asks with nothing but love and confusion why you're hurting. And there's no defending against that. There's no fence to hide behind, no wrench to turn over in your hands. A man can refuse forgiveness. He can refuse comfort. But he cannot, it turns out, look into his living son's face and refuse the simple fact that the boy can see his pain and is worried about him. Cole broke, right there on the bank where his daughter drowned, holding the son who'd nearly followed her. The rancher who hadn't shed a tear that any of us had witnessed in 6 months came apart all at once, the way a frozen creek goes, not slow, but all in a rush, the ice giving way in great cracking sheets. He cried like I have never seen a grown man cry, great heaving sobs that bent him double over the boy, and Eli, alarmed now, patted his father's back with one small hand and said, "It's okay, Daddy. It's okay," which only made it worse or better. I've never been sure there's a difference. Marion reached them then. She stopped a few feet off, and I watched her face, and I watched her decide something. She could have stood back. She'd earned the right to stand back after everything, to make him come the rest of the way alone. Instead, she dropped down into the mud beside them and put her arms around both of them, her husband and her son, and Cole turned his face into her neck, and I heard him say it, finally, the thing he'd been strangling on since October. "I wasn't here, I wasn't here." And Marion, who had carried their daughter up this same bank, who had every reason in the world to agree with him, Marion said, "You're here now. You're here now. Look at me. You're here." I turned my horse around and rode back up the slope and left them to it. Some things an old hired hand has no business watching. I'd seen the part that mattered. I'd like to tell you it was all mended after that. It wasn't. Grief doesn't work like a busted gate that you fix once and it swings true forever. There were hard months still to come. I know because I was there for some of them and I wrote them down. Cole moved back into the house, but the first nights he'd wake the place up with nightmares. He and Marion fought sometimes, the kind of fighting that's almost good to hear, because it means two people are still close enough to wound each other and still care enough to bother. There was a counselor in town they drove to on Thursdays, both of them stiff-necked about it and going anyway. But he came back, the steady man. By degrees the way a thing thaws. I knew it for certain the morning in late April I was forking hay in the loft and heard, drifting up from the corrals, a man's voice, rough, off-key, working through an old hymn while he mended a halter. I stood real still up there in the hay dust and the slanting light and I listened to Cole Brennan sing, and I'll tell you I had to wipe my face with my sleeve and it wasn't the dust. The apricot tree bloomed that first week of April like it always did. Lacey's tree. It bloomed white and pink and shameless over the kitchen door, and nobody had to take the boy and go. Eli never did understand, I don't think, what he did down at the creek that day. He's older now. He's a tall, quiet kid who's good with horses, got his father's hands. Last time I rode out to visit, a few summers back, I tried to tell him that 6 words he didn't even remember saying had pulled his whole family back from the edge of the water. He just looked at me, polite and a little puzzled, the way the young look at old men telling them things, and said he didn't recall it. That's all right, he doesn't need to. I wrote it down, somebody did. April 1, found the boy, found the man too. The rest of that page I left blank. Some things you don't put words to. You just sit with them a while in the hay dust and the slanting light. And let them be what they were. He came back, that's the whole of it.